Hello, everybody. I'll explain this shortly. This old thing I threw on this morning. I'll explain what that's all about in a moment. Follow a vegetable orchestra, they said. So I will try and do my best. So I'm Rob, and you may or may not have heard of me and what I do. So just to set a little context, for many, many years, I was a teacher of permaculture, teaching people practical skills that we need for this time now, how to grow their own food, how to build their own house, all that kind of thing. Then in my own town in the southwest of England, I started what became known as the transition movement, which is a community bottom-up activism process, which started in my town, very, very rapidly spread to 50 countries now around the world, where people are organizing, sharing their stories. It's been one of the great honors of my life to be part of that extraordinary movement. The second bit of context is why we do this. And I want to just speak to what for me feels like one of the big elephants in the corner of the room over this last couple of days, which is the climate and ecological emergency. Now, climate change is something which is complex, but it's not complicated. Those are different things. And so just to distill it down into its most simple thing, thanks to an organization called Climate Science Basics, I just want to share 5 key ideas with you. The first one is, it's warming. You can all see it. Wherever you've traveled from to be here, you can all see that the world is warming. Number 2, it's us. This is not part of a natural cycle. This is caused by us, our addiction to burning stuff, in particular fossil fuels, and our addiction to chopping down trees. Number 3, we're sure. There's no debate anymore among people who know what they're on about, that that's what's actually happening. Number 4, it's bad. It's really bad. And it's going to get an awful lot worse, unimaginably worse, unless we respond to this with imagination and passion and creativity and really make this the central thing of what we're doing. But number 5, we can do something about this. We are not passive in the face of this as a crisis. Now, Monday morning is not a time for graphs. I'm only going to show you 2, I promise, and I won't show you any more. And I'm showing you them more for the stories that they tell, right? In this picture, if you can see along the middle, there is the pink bit. That's humanity's safe place. Everything we associate with human civilization, everything that you as food professionals associate with food, the things that you cook with, the recipes, the culture, all emerged in this safe space where concentrations of CO2 never went above 350 parts per million. Temperatures fluctuated a bit, but that was our stable, safe place. We have now broken out of that space. We're at 431 parts per million and on an upward trajectory. Getting that down is the most important thing that we can do now. We are out of our safe space. We don't know how to work in that space, and we have to get back there as quickly as possible. What might we do about it? Well, I think the only thing that we have as a world for what that might look like is the Paris Agreement, signed, as you might imagine, in Paris in 2015. That sets out a roadmap for how we might get there. As you can see, it means that by 2030, we need to have cut our emissions by 48%. Now, we can either be the people who go, oh, that's really tough, that. Maybe we could just kick it down the road a little bit more. Or the people who go, great, wow, amazing, an opportunity to reimagine everything. That only comes around once every couple of 100 years, and we're here at one of those moments. How exciting is that? So I'm going to be coming back to this idea of 2030. I'm not really interested in what the sort of 2050, I'm not interested in utopias. I'm more interested in what would that 2030 look like if we were halfway there. And we could see the world around us changing, our children's mental health getting better, our air getting cleaner, our lives feeling more nourishing. That's what I want to share with you today. And for me, in the work that I do, having been around climate activism for a long time, what I try to do is reframe that work as actually being around the cultivation of longing. Just talking about extinction and collapse doesn't cut it anymore for me. How do we give people something to run towards? So the story that I love to tell is about the moon. Jules Verne, 1865, wrote a book called From the Earth to the Moon. And in that book, he pulled together all the best science he could find about how we might actually get to the moon. Thrilling, thrilling story. That book inspired scientists and engineers to start figuring out how we might actually get there. And it started to get into the culture. More people wrote stories about it. it? The first film made in 1902 by Georges Méliès, A Trip to the Moon, was about that. We then had this whole genre of popular science. Some of our older members here in the audience will remember growing up with magazines like this, all about how will we get to the moon? What's it going to be like when we get there? By the night, Popeye went to the moon. Mickey Mouse went to the moon. There were dances about how you would walk on the moon. It got into the culture. In the 1950s, there were 10 awful films that were all about all-male crews of astronauts going to the moon and arriving there to find that the only people there were women who hadn't seen men for a very long time. And this one is called Cat Women of the Moon. It is truly the worst film I've ever seen. I watched it so you don't have to. It says there on the poster, see the lost city of love-starved cat women. I love in the poster the idea, this strange male fantasy, you would arrive on the moon full of women who hadn't seen the men for ages. The men look absolutely terrified. But it meant that it got so into the culture, the cultural longing to get to the moon, built and built and built. It meant that in 1963, when JFK announced we will go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, standing in front of a man trying very hard not to sneeze, it meant that actually we managed to do that that's the wrong thing. Tintin went to the moon, of course, very famously. And when JFK did announce standing in front of a man trying very hard not to sneeze, it meant we did it in 6 years. The average age of the people who got us there was 28. And it meant that when Neil Armstrong did land on the moon, Hergé, who made the Tintin comics, did this comic strip of Neil Armstrong being greeted onto the moon by Tintin and Captain Haddock. Welcome to the moon. Because by the time we got there, we'd been there thousands and thousands of times in songs and stories. We don't have 100 years to cultivate longing to address the climate emergency, but the same principle applies. We need to give people things to run towards rather than just things to run screaming in the opposite direction from. I love this quote that's on the front window of the Institute for the Future. They say, any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. I'm a great believer in the ridiculous. I'm kind of here to urge you all to be more ridiculous in the work that you do, because at this point, any solution put forward to the climate emergency that doesn't seem at least a bit ridiculous is not ambitious enough. So I have traveled from our little town of Totnes in Devon. Anyone here ever been to Totnes in Devon? My people. So you may know various things about Totnes. We are the place where the transition movement started, for example. But what you don't know is that deep underneath Totnes Castle, we have a secret laboratory where we have been working for the last 10 years to build the world's first successful, fully functioning time machine. And my friends, I can tell you today that we did it.